You know the story of Hansel and Gretel, don't you? Two adorable children, a whimsical house made of candy, and a witch who's conveniently defeated by the power of sibling teamwork. It's charming, it's sweet. It's also a carefully sanitized version of a tale that originally featured systematic child abandonment and premeditated murder, and enough cannibalism to make a horror novelist blush. Welcome to Twisted Tales Theater, where we peel back the sugarcoating to reveal the bitter truth beneath. The brothers Grimm weren't running a daycare center. They were documenting the collective nightmares of medieval Europe. If you're ready to discover how deep this particular rabbit hole of questionable parenting decisions goes, help me unseal this volume by engaging with this content. Fair warning, you may never look at gingerbread the same way again. Let's begin with what you think you know. In the sanitized version, Hansel and Gretel are the unfortunate victims of economic hardship and a wicked stepmother. Their father, bless his spineless heart, reluctantly agrees to abandon his children in the forest because he's set. Apparently, medieval Germany had yet to invent the concept of family planning or food assistance programs. But here's where it gets interesting. In the original 1812 Grimm collection, it wasn't a stepmother at all, it was their biological mother who orchestrated this delightful family outing. The brothers Grimm, in their infinite wisdom, later decided that having a biological mother attempt infanticide was perhaps a bit too psychologically damaging for their readers. A stepmother, however, perfectly acceptable. Nothing says family values like a good old-fashioned evil stepmother narrative. The children, displaying survival instincts that would make Bear Grylls proud, initially outsmart their parents' murder plot using a trail of pebbles. It's touching, really, to children using basic navigation skills, while their parents demonstrate a stunning lack of both moral compass and geographic awareness. The parents' reaction to finding their children safely returned home? Not relief, not shame, but annoyance. Because nothing says loving family like being irritated by your children's refusal to die quietly in the woods. Now, before we judge these parents too harshly, and trust me, we absolutely will, let's examine the historical context that births such charming family dynamics. Between 1314 and 1322, Europe experienced what historians diplomatically termed the Great Famine. Diplomatically, because the time when people ate their children was apparently too direct for academic journals. This wasn't your typical, oops, forgot to go grocery shopping shortage. This was biblical-level devastation. Crop failures, livestock diseases, and weather patterns that would make a climate scientist weep turned medieval Europe into a continent-sized Hunger Games arena. Wheat prices skyrocketed by 320%. Imagine your grocery bill tripling overnight. Except there's no grocery store, and the wheat is mostly rotting anyway. Salt, essential for preserving food, became as precious as gold, because the rain-soaked climate prevented brine evaporation. It's almost poetic. The very element needed to preserve life became impossible to obtain. The desperation reached such heights that cannibalism and infanticide became documented realities rather than folklore fiction. Suddenly, abandoning your children in the forest starts looking less like child abuse and more like, well, no, it's still child abuse, but at least we understand the economic incentives. Returning to our tale, the parents demonstrating the kind of persistence usually reserved for multi-level marketing schemes decide to try the child. Abandonment approach one more time. This time they lock the door to prevent Hansel from collecting his trusty pebbles. It's almost impressive how much planning went into this attempted infanticide. Hansel, showing the kind of quick thinking that suggests he inherited none of his parents' decision-making abilities, opts for breadcrumbs instead. Now, any modern child who spent 5 minutes outdoors could tell you that leaving food on the ground is essentially sending an engraved invitation to every bird in a 50-mile radius. But Hansel, bless his medieval heart, apparently skipped that particular life lesson. The breadcrumbs are devoured shocking. Absolutely no one except Hansel and the children find themselves genuinely lost. It's at this point that the story transitions from family dysfunction to survival horror, because the universe has a twisted sense of narrative pacing. Lost and starving, the children stumble upon what can only be described as the medieval equivalent of a child predator's dream house. A structure made entirely of bread, cake, and sweets, essentially architectural diabetes, waiting to happen. The house gleams with confectionery, its windows dripping with syrup, its roof tiled with gingerbread. It's every child's fantasy and, as we'll discover, every parent's nightmare. The children, displaying the survival instincts of particularly naive lemmings, immediately begin devouring the house. Because when you're lost in a forest and discover a building made of food, the logical response is obviously to start eating it rather than questioning why such a thing exists in the first place. The fact that a house made of perishable goods has survived long enough for them to find it apparently doesn't trigger any warning bells. Enter the witch hand. Here's where our tale takes a hard left turn into serial killer territory. She emerges with the kind of warm, grandmotherly demeanor that would make modern parents reach for the pepper spray. Her invitation to come inside for more food is delivered with all the sincerity of a timeshare presentation, and about as trustworthy. The witch's operation is disturbingly methodical. She immediately imprisons Hansel in a cage because apparently she's the medieval equivalent of a farm-to-table enthusiast and forces Gretel into domestic servitude. It's human trafficking with a culinary twist, and the efficiency of her operation suggests this isn't her first rodeo. Every day, she checks Hansel's finger to assess his readiness for consumption. It's quality control for cannibalism, complete with a feeding schedule designed to optimize tenderness. Hansel, displaying more intelligence than he's shown thus far, tricks the visually impaired witch by substituting a thin bone for his finger. It's a con game where the stakes are literally being eaten alive. The witch's impatience with Hansel's apparent failure to fatten up reveals something interesting about medieval nutritional understanding. She seems genuinely puzzled by his lack of weight gain, suggesting either a profound misunderstanding of human metabolism or the kind of optimistic timeline that would make modern diet industry executives weep with envy. Finally, the witch decides to cut her losses and cook what she has. She fires up the oven and instructs Gretel to climb inside to check if it's hot enough. Now, even by medieval standards of workplace safety, asking a child to climb into a blazing oven represents a significant HR violation. But Gretel, perhaps having inherited the one functional brain cell in her family, recognizes this for what it is: attempted murder with extra steps. What follows is perhaps literature's most satisfying example of poetic justice. Gretel, feigning ignorance with the skill of a seasoned actress, asks for a demonstration. The witch, apparently never having heard the phrase "never trust your victim to follow instructions," obligingly sticks her head into the oven to show how it's done. Gretel's response is swift and decisive. She shoves the witch into the oven and slams the door shut. It's murder, technically, but it's also self-defense and sibling rescue rolled into one efficient action. The witch's death is described with a kind of detail that suggests the brothers Grimm had strong opinions about appropriate punishments for child predators. With the witch reduced to ashes, a process that medieval readers apparently found deeply satisfying, the children discover her treasure hoard. Gold, jewels, and precious stones fill their pockets, transforming them from poverty-stricken waifs into medieval venture capitalists. It's the kind of wealth redistribution that only works in fairy tales and revolution scenarios. They return home to find their father conveniently remorseful and their stepmother conveniently dead. The timing is remarkable, almost as if the universe operates on narrative convenience rather than logical causation. Their father's joy at their return might seem touching until you remember that he literally tried to murder them twice. But hey, who among us hasn't made a few parenting mistakes? The treasure ensures they'll never be hungry again. Which is a lovely sentiment that completely ignores the psychological trauma of being abandoned, prisoned, and nearly cannibalized. But this is fairy tale logic, where material wealth apparently cures all emotional wounds. The Grimm version, published in 1812, represents just one link in a chain of increasingly disturbing tales. Charles Perrault's Happo Mythum from 1697 features similar themes, but takes them to even darker places. 7 children are abandoned in the forest, not 2. The antagonist is an ogre who accidentally murders his own 7 daughters in the dark, mistaking them for the boys he intended to kill. It's a story that makes Hansel and Gretel look like a heartwarming family comedy by comparison. The ogre's mistake slaughtering his own children while drunk adds a layer of tragic irony that somehow makes the violence even more disturbing. At least the witch in Hansel and Gretel had the courtesy to be intentionally evil. Even earlier, we find Babes in the Wood from 1595, which predates the Grimm tale by over 2 centuries. This English folktale features two orphaned children whose uncle plots to steal their inheritance by having them murdered. The hired killers can't bring themselves to commit the act. They have more moral backbone than the children's actual family, so they abandon them in the forest instead. Unlike Hansel and Gretel, these children don't find a witch's house or overcome their predicament through cleverness. They simply die of exposure under an oak tree, covered tenderly with leaves by a robin. It's an ending so bleak it makes the cannibalistic, which seem like a welcome alternative. What makes Babes in the Wood particularly chilling is its potential basis in real events. In 1541, Robert de Grey became guardian of his brother's children after their father's death. The children were sent to visit their mother, who had remarried and moved away. They disappeared en route and were never seen again. Robert de Grey conveniently inherited the family estate Griston Hall following their disappearance. Local legends claim the children were murdered and hidden in nearby Wayland Wood, which has been known as Wailing Wood for centuries due to reports of ghostly children's voices. It's the kind of historical mystery that transforms folklore from entertainment into true crime documentation. The parallel to the princes in the Tower Word, the Fifth and his brother Richard, who mysteriously vanished from the Tower of London in 1483 after their uncle, Richard III, usurped the throne, suggests a pattern. Uncles eliminating inconvenient nephews and nieces for inheritance. Purposes was apparently common enough to spawn multiple folktales warning about the practice. Perhaps the darkest variation comes from Romanian folklore, where the tale takes on supernatural elements that make the Grimm version look positively cheerful. In this version, the stepmother doesn't merely abandon the children. She murders the boy and forces his sister to prepare him as a meal for their father. The girl, in an act of desperate love and defiance, hides her brother's heart in a hollow tree rather than cooking it. The next day, a cuckoo bird emerges from the tree, singing about how his sister cooked him and his father ate him. But he has been transformed and is now safe from his stepmother. The stepmother's reaction to this supernatural revelation is to hurl salt at the bird, because apparently, even in the face of obvious divine intervention, her first instinct is violence. Salt misses and strikes her own head instead, killing her instantly. It's poetic justice, with a supernatural twist, where evil literally rebounds upon itself. This version transforms the tale from a story about cleverness overcoming danger into a meditation on transformation, justice, and the power of love to transcend death. The boy's metamorphosis into a cuckoo represents rebirth and liberation, while his song serves as both testimony and warning. The witch's house made of sweets may have roots in an even older folkloric tradition, the land of Cockaigne, mythical paradise that emerged in medieval European folklore. This fantasy realm was imagined as a place of endless abundance where rivers flowed with wine, streets were paved with pastry, and houses were made of cake and sweets. Cockaigne represented the ultimate escape from medieval hardship, especially during times of famine. It was a world where the natural order was reversed, work was unnecessary, and indulgence was not only permitted, but encouraged. The imagery has persisted throughout history, influencing everything from Pinocchio's Land of Toys to Disney's Pleasure Island. But here's the crucial element. In most Cockaigne stories, this paradise comes with a price. Abundance is a trap, the indulgence a test, and those who succumb to greed face consequences. The witch's house in Hansel and Gretel functions similarly. It's an offering of paradise that conceals predatory intent. The moral lesson is clear. When something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And when a house made of food appears in a forest where children are starving, the appropriate response is suspicion, not gluttony. But then again, if fairy tale characters made sensible decisions, we wouldn't have fairy tales. These stories, in all their variations, serve as more than entertainment. They're survival manuals disguised as folklore. They teach children that adults can't always be trusted, that family members might prioritize their own interests over their children's welfare, and that sometimes salvation requires taking violent action against those who would harm you. The recurring motifs: abandoned children, trail-making attempts, cannibalistic threats, and clever escapes represent humanity's attempts to process and prepare for its darkest possibilities. These aren't just stories, they're psychological armor, preparing young minds for a world where protection isn't guaranteed and survival often depends on wit rather than strength. The witch in Hansel and Gretel isn't just a villain, she's every predator who uses false kindness to lure victims. The gingerbread house isn't just a fantastical element, it's a metaphor for any trap disguised as a gift. And the children's triumph isn't just a happy ending, it's a lesson in recognizing danger and taking decisive action when threatened. So there you have it, the true story of Hansel and Gretel, stripped of its Disney veneer and revealed in all its medieval horror. A tale of parental abandonment, child trafficking, attempted murder, and justified homicide, all wrapped up in the comforting imagery of candy houses and clever children. The sanitized versions we tell our children today serve their purpose. They provide the psychological benefits of the original stories, while sparing young minds the full weight of human cruelty. But understanding the original versions gives us insight into the fears and challenges our ancestors faced, and the wisdom they embedded in these seemingly simple tales. These stories remind us that evil often wears a friendly face, that family bonds don't guarantee protection, and that sometimes the only way to escape a trap is to spring it on the trapper instead. Their lessons as relevant today as they were in medieval Europe, because human nature in all its darkness and light remains remarkably consistent across centuries. The next time you see a gingerbread house, remember, it's not just a sweet treat. It's a warning wrapped in sugar, baked to perfection, and served with a side of moral instruction. And that, perhaps, is the most valuable recipe of all. What stories sanitized history should we expose next? The archives are full of questionable life choices and even more questionable parenting decisions. Till then, sleep well and maybe double check that your house isn't made of anything edible.